YEUNG, the president of the Asia Bureau of Finance and Economic Research. Together with my co-chair, Professor Zhiguo, head of Chicago Booth and BFI, and the organizing committee members, Peng Jun of SAIF, Michael Zhong, and Bo Hui Jiang of CUHK, and Xiaoyan Jiang of Tsinghua PBC School of Finance. We would like to welcome you to the e-seminar series on capital market development, China and Asia. Asia's capital market, especially China, have made many impressive developments. We organized this forum to facilitate exchange of research to inform academics, practitioners, and policymakers. Today's topic is China's central bank digital currency. This development attracts great attention among us all. Indeed, today, we have more than 800 registered for this seminar. We are very lucky to have the eminent expert and thought leader on the topic, Professor Daryl Davey, to help us to understand the international implication of this development. Allow me to introduce Professor Daryl Davey. Daryl is Adams Distinguished Professor of Management and Professor of Finance at the Graduate School of Business and Professor of Economics at the Department of Economics at Stanford University. Daryl is a fellow of the Econometric Society, a research fellow of the NBER, a fellow of the American Finance Association, a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Science, and a senior fellow of ABFER. He was the 2009 president of the American Finance Association. Daryl is such a prolific and influential scholar. I would not have time to really list his accomplishment, so I will just mention that. To the best of my knowledge, he is the first eminent scholar to offer a course on China's financial system among top business schools. I'm reading his course materials and so on, and I continue to learn so much from him. And thank you, Daryl. We are all very grateful to have this opportunity to learn directly from you here on this topic, the international implications of China's central bank currency, central bank digital currency. Daryl, I'll pass the audience to you. And after you have finished your presentation, Zhiguo will lead the Q&A. Thank you very much, Zhiguo. We look forward to listening to you.
Thank you so much, Bernard. I'm really, really pleased to be here. And thank you also, Zhiguo, for co-hosting me and for leading the discussion today. This is going to be a really exciting topic of discussion. I know that it's on the minds of many people. I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to share some slides. I'm going to walk through just what DCEP is at the level that we understand it now and that we have time for this evening. And I'm going to focus almost all of my attention on the international implications of China's new central bank digital currency, which is called DCEP, or Digital Currency Electronic Payment. This topic has received a lot of attention recently in policy circles. For example, a few months ago, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute released a study on the global implications of DCEP. And just last week, the Center for the CNAS, the Center for a New American Security, released its own report on this topic. And soon at Stanford University, under the auspices of the Hoover Institution, Dr. Elizabeth Economy and I are going to co-direct a new project on the global implications of DCEP. And hopefully you'll hear more about that later. But for now, I'm speaking only for myself. And this is a sensitive topic, so in some respects, not in most. I'm going to beg your indulgence as we go through some of these international implications, because some of them involve US-China relationships. But I'm going to focus tonight on the finance side. I'm not a geopolitical scientist. I'm a finance person, as Bernard said. And I want to focus on the financial implications mostly. Now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, the other wrinkle on this evening's webinar is that I'm actually going to run a reverse webinar. I'm going to actually poll you for your views on these on the issues regarding international implications of DSEP, because I'm here to learn. There's very little known right now about this topic. So let me first walk through the basics that most of you are aware of. Here is a payment transaction. As those of you who follow the payments literature knows, almost always the protagonists in a payment story are Alice and Bob. And don't tell me where, I don't know where Alice and Bob came from, but they're always in the story. And in this case, Alice is at the baker, Bob the baker, to purchase some goods. And she needs to pay Bob the baker 80 renminbi. And the question that we're facing tonight is, how are these payments going to get made in the future? And we're facing a future state in which central bank digital currencies may play a role. But first, let me walk through the conventional way that this is done in the United States. And later, I'll discuss how it's done commonly today in China. So in the United States, Alice would use a credit card quite frequently, or could even write a check, or somehow use, it could be a mobile phone overlay on her credit card account. But in any case, she will send a message to her bank, and Alice's bank will then forward through a series of debits and credits the 80 renminbi to Bob's bank. If it's an instant payment system, Bob will get a message saying, "You got the money, give Alice the bread." If it's not an instant payment system, Bob will get a message saying, "You're going to get the money in the next couple of days." In the United States, this is a pretty slow, clunky system. It's very expensive. It's not satisfactory. And the United States is going to be looking into what to do about that. But in China, I'll talk to you a minute about how much faster this works and why it works faster. If it's done by the conventional bank payment rails, what's typically done is that Alice could be customer 1, the blue dot at the upper left corner. Alice's bank B1 would then merge this payment transaction with all the other payment transactions. Most likely it would go through the central bank over to, say, bank 3, which is Bob's bank, and Bob could be customer 7 of bank 3, and Bob will eventually get the money. And as I said, this is done by many different methods around the world, but 99% of the world's payment transactions, both domestically and cross-border, happen via bank rails. Now let's talk about DSEP. This is really a really exciting development. I'm going to jump over other payment methods and come back to some of them in a moment. So let's review what will happen at a very high level. And again, this is somewhat speculative because we only have a basic understanding of how this is all going to work with the new DSEP system in China. So what's going to happen, this is a 2-layer system. Alice will interact with the Central Bank of China, which is indicated at the bottom, via a payment service provider, or PSP. So PSP-A is Alice's payment service provider, and Alice will send a message to her payment service provider, which will record a transaction and on-send the message to the People's Bank of China, which will record the transaction. Alice's account at the People's Bank of China in digital currency will be debited by 80 renminbi in favor of Bob's account. Bob will get an instant message through his payment service provider that Alice has made the payment. And these may or may not be the same payment service providers. So for example, Alice's payment service provider could be one of the large Chinese banks like ICBC, or it could be Alipay or WeChat Pay. And Bob's payment service providers could be a different large bank like the Agricultural Bank of China, or a different payment service provider. Now I'm leaving out a lot of details. Most of them are not actually known in great detail. If you want to read more about this, an authoritative source is a G30 report that is authored by the Group of 30, a prominent group of leading former central bankers. And in that report on pages 17 and 18, in a box that was actually authored by officials at the People's Bank of China, you'll see what I think is the most authoritative summary of DCEP. Now, there are other ways for Alice and Bob to use DCEP if they're not online. If they're offline, they could transfer via a wallet tap. So Alice could tap her phone at Bob's point of sale terminal. It wouldn't necessarily have to go through this messaging system. Suppose Alice was, for example, in a place where there was no internet access. She could do it that way. Of course, they don't have to be in physical proximity to each other. But if they're going to do a payment out of physical proximity, they're probably going to be on one of them, or both of them will have to be on the internet. That's roughly how DCEP is going to work. It's mainly going to be a retail system. It's mainly going to replace physical cash, or at least that's the design. And you might ask, well, China already has the most advanced mobile payment system in the world by virtue of Alipay and WeChat Pay, which run about 90% of China's retail payments right now in the many tens of trillions of dollars a year. So how is this going to be different for Alice and Bob? And at the level I understand it now, it's not going to be functionally that much different for Alice and Bob. It's going to work around, it's going to be functionally about as convenient for them. It will allow the People's Bank of China to collect all of the data in one place and therefore allow the People's Bank of China to know more about what's going on in China and more easily. It will also allow China to conduct monetary policy based on real-time payments in a more simple fashion. And there are other advantages for China that have been discussed by Chinese officials, some of which include cross-border use of the renminbi and increasing the international use of the renminbi. But again, for Alice and Bob in China, I don't think it's going to make a big difference for their payment experience, at least based on what we know today. China's People's Bank of China, I said it's a two-tier system. It's not all being run by the People's Bank of China. You need payment service providers like banks and fintech firms. And because there's messaging involved, telcos are probably going to be involved as well. So that's why China is calling this a two-tiered system. A lot of the interface with the real economy is through market participants rather than the People's Bank of China. But the actual ledger, official ledger of who owes who what, or who has how much funds is held by the People's Bank of China, and they have all of the records as well. This is being tested right now in 4 Chinese cities. I just read an interesting news account recently about employees in Shenzhen of Alibaba walking into shops and paying for things with DCEP. So it's already being tested. The biggest test that's currently discussed is going to be in February 2022 at the Beijing Olympics. Before I go any further, I'm going to do one of my several poll questions, and I'm going to ask my research assistant at Stanford to conduct this poll. So if you would all take a moment, I'll walk through this with you. As I said, this is kind of a reverse seminar. I'm collecting information from you. It's all anonymous. And I've designed the poll, at least from my point of view, that there are no wrong answers. Every answer seems plausible to me. And I'm interested in getting your views on this. So within China, to what degree is DCEP likely to displace other payment methods over the next decade? Answer A, Alipay and WeChat Pay will remain the most popular general retail payment methods. Answer B, DCEP will be one of several popular payment methods, including Alipay and WeChat Pay. Answer C, DCEP will dominate retail payments within a decade. Answer D, DCEP will dominate retail payments and also play a significant role in larger wholesale commercial payments. And finally, I am too uncertain about this to speculate. So those are the choices. And I assume that you're all plugging in your answers to these questions. I think that's probably enough time to close the poll, David. Let's see what the results say for everybody. So it's a mix of answers with a plurality on B. DSEP will be one of several popular payment methods, including Alipay and WeChat Pay. Interesting. Okay, so I've spent just a few minutes giving you an idea of what DSEP is, and we've discussed the extent to which it might displace other payment methods. Of course, it would likely displace a lot of paper cash payments. It seems strange that in the 21st century, we're actually using paper money to the extent that we still do. Paper money was invented in China, and the Chinese are way ahead, it seems, in payments over the centuries. They're certainly far ahead of all other countries today, even without DSEP. Now let's move to the cross-border arena, which is the main focus of my interest tonight. If you would close the poll, David. Okay, so for cross-border payments, while there's a lot of fintech entrants and other entrants into this space, by far the largest volume of transactions from one country to another are handled by banks through the domestic bank payment rails and then jumping across to another system of bank payment rails in a different country. And so this simple schematic is skipping, obviously, all of the gory details. But if customer one is Alice in, let's say, China, and customer two is Bob, let's say, in Singapore, then customer one could instruct her bank to get a certain number of renminbi or Singapore dollars to Bob. And eventually, perhaps bank three in Singapore would have a correspondent relationship with bank four. Pardon me, bank three in China would have a correspondent relationship with bank four in Singapore. And there would be debits and credits in the two currencies between those two banks, and then Bob would get his money via the payment rails in China. And it's crucial for this system to work that these instructions to send the money eventually to Bob are easy to follow, because otherwise, as you could see, the money could easily get lost in the system. And there is a special set of messages organized by SWIFT that is the backbone messaging system for the correspondent banking system today. So SWIFT handles essentially all cross-border payments. Currently, the United States dollar is the dominant cross-border payment currency. It handles about 42% as of the end of January, the numbers just came out today, of international payments. And China's renminbi is, I think it's about seventh or so on the list. It's handling under 2% of international payments. That is, the renminbi is, goes through correspondent banking transactions across border on about under 2%. It's actually about 1.5% or a bit less. And China has been encouraging the increased use of the renminbi for international purposes and has made significant progress over the last decade. And some Chinese officials have suggested that DSEP could increase the use of the renminbi internationally. That is, it could aid China's ambitions to increase the international use of the renminbi. Let's talk a little bit about what people have been saying about that. Here's a remark that was just made last week at the World Economic Forum. Actually, Senior Minister Tharman made some very perceptive remarks in exactly the same session. So if you go to the World Economic Forum and look for this session, you'll be educated by a very interesting hour. But one of the interesting remarks by Zhu Min, who's a professor in China and the chairman of China's National Institute of Financial Research. When asked to give an example, he said, so let's say if Singapore was willing to have the Chinese digital currency moving to Singapore, and China was willing to accept a Singapore digital currency, maybe the two countries can sign a deal to work on those things. What does that mean? Well, maybe it means that you don't need to use correspondent banking. This doesn't necessarily require correspondent banking, but it might. It's speculative to say, but it's possible that DCEP could be used as a parallel method for moving money across borders. And that has been speculated about quite a bit. I'm going to ask for your views on that in just a minute, but first, I'll give you another quote, which I found interesting. The screen is, there we go. This is at a Hong Kong Legislative Council meeting in October of last year. Christopher Hui, the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury of Hong Kong, was asked in a Legislative Council meeting about progress in the area of digital payments. And among his remarks, the one that I thought was quite interesting was, quote, in the event that the PBOC would like to explore the use of DCEP in places outside of the mainland, including Hong Kong, the government and the HKMA will actively respond and collaborate. So maybe there's some interest in the international use of DCEP. David, I think this might be a good place to run the next poll question, please. So I want to ask first, not about cross-border, but within a foreign country. So this is not about cross-border, it's about a different country that's thinking about using DCEP technology within its own borders for its own payment system. So the question is, if China were willing to provide technical support to other countries for the adoption of DCEP technology, to what extent would other countries be likely to deploy this technology within their own payment systems? The first answer is, because of national commercial interest or data security concerns, most countries would wish to avoid having China's DCEP technology play an important role in their domestic currency payment systems. The second answer is, the development of CBDC technology has high fixed costs and long lead times. Some emerging market economies would take advantage of DCEP technology support from China to introduce their own CBDCs. The third answer is, DCEP will become a global technology standard. Many countries will wish to allow use of DCEP technology within their within their domestic currency payment systems. And then finally, none of the above. So as I promised, I'm actually here to learn from you. So I'm a bit cheating in this webinar. I'm actually learning from you. I think that's probably enough time. David, do you want to close the poll and see what people thought? Very interesting. So the largest number of people chose B because of high fixed costs and long lead times. Some emerging market economies would take advantage of that technology support from China. Now, this is not to suggest China would actually offer that support, but that's consistent with the projection of China's influence globally, and China has been interested in doing using other financial means to project its influence, like Belt and Road. So perhaps China would be interested in offering this technology to other countries. And at least many of you think that at least emerging market countries would choose to take advantage of that offer. Would you close the poll, please, David? And run the next poll? Okay, here we go. If China's DCEP technology is adopted by other countries within their own payment systems, what are the associated benefits for China? So the first answer is China's DCEP technology providers would benefit commercially. Beyond this, China would not benefit except perhaps as a matter of prestige. The second answer is, in addition to commercial benefit for China, the adoption of DCEP technology within foreign payment systems would support the international use of the renminbi, which is what we just discussed. Answer C, in addition to commercial benefits, foreign use of DCEP technology would provide valuable data to China's government on foreign transactions. Answer D is that the advantages of both mentioned in parts B and C would apply. That is, both increased international use of the renminbi and additional valuable data for China. And the final answer is none of the above. So let's see what everyone chose, David. So a significant majority chose both B and C. And of those that didn't choose both, more chose B than C, and there were very, very little support for the other answers. That is very, very interesting. Thank you. David, let's do one more poll question, please. Now we get to the cross-border use. So the last two questions were about the use of DCEP technology within foreign domestic payment systems. And now we're going to be talking about cross-border. So the question is, could DCEP technology substitute for SWIFT-enabled cross-border correspondent banking? Answer A, DCEP technology is not technically suitable as a substitute for SWIFT-enabled correspondent banking. There's a typo there. Answer B, although technically capable of substituting for conventional correspondent banking, DCEP is unlikely to be used significantly in this way. Answer C, because DCEP technology would allow fast and inexpensive cross-border payments, it's likely to achieve a significant market share in this arena. Answer D, new, that is newer, fintech cross-border payment methods will dominate, leaving no significant space for DCEP in this market. And answer E, none of the above. So I'm challenging you now with harder and harder questions. I hope you've had a chance to think about those. I'll just give it 1 or 2 more seconds because this is not a simple question. Okay, let's see the results, please, David. Okay, so most people chose B or C. B, although technically capable, it's unlikely to be used significantly. And C, because if you believe this is the correct answer, you believe it would allow fast and inexpensive cross-border payments, and it's likely to achieve a significant market share. And that's slightly more responses than B. And that's very, very interesting. By the way, I asked 2 really big experts in global payments this question. Both are among the most knowledgeable people anywhere one of them said, when I asked this question, was essentially B. That was the answer. Though technically capable, it's unlikely to be used significantly. And this individual believed that the SWIFT correspondent banking system is actually very efficient, and it's getting even more efficient, and it's going to be hard to do better. So even though DCEP might be capable of doing this, it's unlikely to be used significantly. The other expert said it's not suitable for it technically. It's not really that fit for purpose. So it's interesting that many of you have some confidence that it would work and it would actually get some market share. Okay, the last question is about the United States. So I'm very interested in the US strategic planning over its payment system. And the US, as most of you know, is way behind China on payment technology, especially at the retail level. And it's currently working, doing R&D on digital currencies, but it's not going to test or deploy them anytime soon. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, when asked about this, said, it's better to get it right than to be first. In other words, we'll take our time, we'll make sure that it's working well, and we're not in a race. This is not like the 1960s in which the United States entered into a space race with Russia. It's more like the United States will try to do a good job and develop the digital currency and then later decide whether it wants to deploy it. I have a question for you, the last question for this evening, on US strategy in this area. So David, would you launch that poll? And we're going to take, actually, it's a even more complicated question. And I think there might be an extra answer at the bottom. Is that right? Yeah, none of the above is at the very bottom if you scroll. But let me walk through this. And this one will take a little bit more time. So as the United States official sector plans improvements to its payment system, does the emergence of DCEP imply a shift in US strategy? The research project that Dr. Economy and I are working on will hopefully shed some light on this question and perhaps even provide a roadmap for US policymakers in this area. So I'm very, very interested in what you all think about this question. The first answer is no. In other words, no, it doesn't imply a shift in US strategy. The imperative to reform the US payment system is already clear. Although DCEP might concern the US government, what needs to be done with the US payment system and when to do it are the same with and without DCEP. The second answer is, because China and the US are vying with each other commercially and geopolitically, the emergence of DCEP will accelerate the upgrade of US payment systems. Beyond speeding up, however, how to upgrade the US payment system is unaffected by DCEP. The third answer is, DCEP will trigger the introduction of a US CBDC. The fourth answer is, DCEP will cause the US to reconsider its target payment system, but this does not necessarily imply a US dollar CBDC. If a CBDC is a good idea for the US, then it's a good idea with or without DCEP. And the last answer, if you scroll down, if you want to choose it, is none of the above. So again, I'm very curious. Take your time. I'm going to give you another few seconds and think about what you would do if you were a US policymaker. By the way, I'm a Canadian. I'm politically neutral, and I'm an academic. So I don't really have a big stake in this, but I am interested in what the best policy advice for the United States would be. And so it's still early stages in looking into the impact of DCEP on US strategy. Okay, let's see what the answers are, David. So what's the numerical on D? I can't read the number. I guess we could add up the rest and subtract. Oh, there it is, 53%. So a bit more than half of you chose number D. DCEP will cause the US to reconsider its target payment system, but this does not necessarily imply a US dollar CBDC. And some of you said the US will speed up, but it won't really change its strategy other than speeding up because of China's DCEP technology. And none of the other answers got a heavy response, but they did get some responses. Okay, let's close the poll. And I'm not going to go through these appendix slides. I'm going to open it up for discussion. And Zhiguo, Professor He from the University of Chicago, is going to lead this discussion. I'm going to stop screen share so that we can see each other.
Thanks, Daryl, for this unique way of presenting your slides and bring everybody attention. It's just so fast when went through. So I would encourage everybody, including in the audience side as well as the panelists, to just raise your hand if you're the panelist. If you're in the audience side, just type in the Q&A. I already saw some questions along the line, but then I will just try to combine, and then let's have a discussion. My first question along the line that Daryl is talking about, perhaps is on this so-called privacy issues that I have been trying to read in detail. Obviously, Daryl seems to say that there's a box in the G30 report that's the most authoritative material, which seems to be true, but there's not so much of information there either. So different people have different thoughts, and I'm trying to collect a different way of thinking. One way of, I was preparing something as well. There's one way of the organized, like the way that it's organized data is basically called, sorry that I'm using the English, Chinese, 前台资源后台实名. Like front side, you can hide your identity, but at the back end, it's not necessarily. Now, there were not very much to say what does it mean by at the back end is fully identity. The second point I want to make is that when I talked with some guy at the CBDC, they were saying that a lot of times when they do this anti-money laundering, KYC, all the things, they use this big data way of doing it instead of revealing the true identity. So I believe that Daryl also talked to real guy at the PBOC. I'm just really curious to know that what's in their mind of having this big data set. Is that a really like they are trying to leave the option to keeping track of every details of each transaction, each person, each name?
Yeah. My read of that, Zhiguo, is that indeed they're going to collect all the details and store them, and that they will be used for KYC, for AML. Officials also mentioned that it could be used to pursue crimes, other crimes. They also say it could be used for macroeconomic purposes. Clearly, China has a lot of interest in what its people are doing in many respects. There's a lot of data that's being collected by China's security services and for other purposes, social monitoring and so on. So this could add to the wealth of data that China has about what's going on in China. Having said that, according to people that I've spoken with, the data pretty much already exists. When you're using Alipay and WeChat Pay, China's government does have access to those transactions with almost, with close to certainty in most cases. But the big data analysis of having all the data in one place will make it easier to unify the data under one database. So it does increase the ability of China to monitor transactions. They call the system controlled anonymity, which means, as you pointed out in Chinese, from the user's point of view, they don't find out necessarily what other users are doing. And the payment service providers don't learn everything either. They only learn what their own customers are doing. But they have an independent record of what their own customers are doing. But then the PBC has this massive it's planned that they will have a massive combined data set.
Yeah. So let me just add one point that I really concur with your last point, is that a lot of times that it's just similar to the Western reaction of this credit system. I always tell my friends that, pretty much they already had those things. So whenever there was something coming out, it's often the time that is for something else. It's not like, people are just too sensitive on this particular part of it. Obviously, we need to see, and this is why that we need to talk these things out. Bernie had two questions. Why don't you just speak up?
Yeah. Thank you, Daryl. This is the first time I observe really a wonderful way to conduct a seminar, and thank you very much. I have two questions that really reveal my ignorance, but I think other people in the audience have the same question. The first one, both questions are related to what happens inside China with this central bank digital currency. What is the impact of developing this to the internal financial system in China? What's the impact on banks? What's the impact on a variety of things? It may be too broad a question, but please narrow it in whichever way you like. The second question I have in mind is, like, if I do have this internationalized central bank digital currency in renminbi, what will happen to the convertibility or the controlled issues that right now is still affecting China's convertibility? The renminbi's convertibility.
So let me address the first one with respect to what happens inside China's financial system. It does change the balance of power between the payment service providers that are dominating now, Alipay and WeChat Pay, and the banks. Because if China nudges its people to use CBDC, DCEP system, the banks will be better able to compete, perhaps, with Alipay and WeChat Pay. Although Mu Changchun, who is one of the chief architects of DCEP, said in a speech recently that he expects there to be a significant amount of concentration. That is, there won't be a whole lot of different payment service providers each having an equal share of the market. He speculated that a lot of the market for payment service provision with DCEP will get focused on a small number of payment service providers. So maybe it will all end up back with Alipay and WeChat Pay if the bank payment service providers are not light enough on their feet to get in on the action. Just to summarize, I think that means that China would like to level the playing field a little bit more between banks and the fintech firms. And whether that will happen or not remains to be seen. Other than that, well, it'll reduce the use of paper money and increase the use of electronic money, which will mean possibly the payment system will run better. You'll be able, paper money is expensive and cumbersome. That could improve the financial system from the viewpoint of effective payments. Although Alipay and WeChat Pay are already doing the vast majority of city-based payments, in the country side of China, paper money is still in significant use, and this could improve payment efficiency outside of the cities. At least that's one of the hopes for China. I think those are the main issues. And with respect to cross-border convertibility, I mean, the capital controls are a separate, independent issue. And your ability to move money in and out of China, well, I don't think it's going to change very much legally. I mean, it might limit some of the illegal uses that would have otherwise occurred. For example, one of the reasons that accelerated DCEP was the emergence of Bitcoin and Libra, now called Diem. And Chinese officials spoke about the fact that they didn't want those currencies, which they really would have a difficult time controlling, or a more difficult time, to make it possible to conduct either illegal transactions or cross-border transactions, violating the capital controls. So if those other digital currencies are reduced in use by DCEP, then that may contribute to China being able to better enforce its cross-border capital movements. I don't know what the long-term state is on opening up those capital controls. The changes, China's plans in that area seem to change. I see YEUNG is here. He may have a better view on that.
Hi, Daryl. It's great to hear your take on China's digital central bank currency. I'm curious, sort of in your discussion, you didn't mention sort of the incentive for private sector to adopt the DCEP. I'm always curious because for this to be used widely, right? I mean, many agencies and many sort of merchants, they have to sort of to adopt this, right? And for the provider, they have to provide a lot of services. I mean, for the current WeChat Pay and the Alipay, of course, they are driven by commercial interest, right? So with hundreds of billions of market valuation in the back, they can get this done, right? So for the central bank, maybe there's a plan. So how to commercialize without commercial interest is kind of hard to get this. I mean, this is a big fixed cost, right? I mean, maybe with the PBC's as an official kind of order, they will have to do it to some extent. But on the other hand, for small merchants, it's going to be hard, right? So I mean, big banks, of course, they will do it, but for smaller sort of shops and so on, how can they do this? I'm curious.
Yeah. So I think in every country, including the United States, the official sector has the upper hand on what currencies are used widely in the payment system. And so China wishes to nudge DCEP ahead of other payments. It certainly has all the dials, buttons, and levers that it needs in terms of regulation, for example, to nudge DCEP into use. Well, the obvious way that it did it in one of its tests was to give it away to the residents in one city. And of course, then they all chose to spend the money because it's programmable money, and they programmed the bonus DCEP to expire in a certain number of weeks. So of course, many people went out and used it right away. That's obviously not the solution for getting DCEP into broader use, but China can subsidize the use of DCEP for or penalize the use of other payment methods with many alternative methods. But will it do that? I have no idea. I mean, maybe many of you, when you answered that poll, I was quite interested to see the plurality of votes on whether DCEP will displace WeChat Pay and Alipay or be dominated by it was neither. It was that they would share the market. And I think that's a reasonable expectation. China is not going to go through all this effort and just leave it as a dormant payment system.
I do think there's a little bit national pride at this point of using this. You can see floor-on discussion, etc. But Bernie, you had a follow-up question, then Jun.
Yes, okay, thank you. And also, Zhiguo, there are some good questions in the chat group.
Yeah.
Okay. My follow-up question to Daryl is this. Does this thing mean that ordinary citizens have an account with the central bank, or does it not? And then following with that is like, would this central bank digital currency means that people can move money around a lot faster, a lot more fluently, and what's the implication of this on weaker financial institutions? So I start to ask the question about the stability of the weaker regions of the weaker banks. Then relatedly, if this represents the central bank has some way to directly inject some money into my account, then the government can really administer its policies in very pinpointed way. And what's the implication of this? Both in terms of fiscal policy and monetary policy and other things.
Sure, let me try those. So the first answer is just a simple yes. If you're using DCEP, you will have an account at the People's Bank of China. There will be an ID that goes with you. There will be money in your account if you're using it. You will also have an account at the payment service provider that issued the DCEP to you. It's a two-tiered system. So if you got your DCEP at the Agricultural Bank of China, then you're opening an account there, and they're opening an account on your behalf at the People's Bank of China, where money will sit in your name as a direct claim on the central bank. The other question is, how can China use this, or will it? I think it was an intermediate question. How much will it improve payments in China? I think with respect to the use of paper money, displacing paper money is probably going to improve payments somewhat. I don't think it's going to, for those that are using Alipay and WeChat Pay, if they continue to use those or move over to DCEP, it's not going to change their payment experience very much.
But
what are the other uses?
Let me interrupt you. Let's say because of the efficiency in this payment, let's say I have some money with Hui's bank, and I don't trust him, then I immediately move it to Zhongwei's bank. There would be a very, very fast movement. Any sign of danger would run.
Yeah, well, that's one of the most widely discussed topics in the whole topic of central bank digital currencies is, will they lead to runs? I'm skeptical that they will lead to runs. During the 2008 financial crisis, the total amount of deposits in the US deposit system increased. There were runs on the weakest banks, but it didn't cause financial stability because it didn't happen that the largest banks were losing deposits so fast. And if you wanted to run on a bank in 2008, you didn't need CBDC to run to it. You could put your money in JP Morgan and with no concern, and they did get a lot more deposits. So I'm pretty copacetic on that issue. But I do want to remark on the last point you made. How could it make it easier for the government to conduct operations with its people? Well, think about in the United States how hard it was for the US government to make COVID payments. I don't know if you remember all the stories about, and some of them were quite humorous, about how the administration was sending paper checks to people all over the country that took literally months to get there. They were often mailed to people that were no longer alive, and some people never got their money. If with a CBDC, China could populate the account of essentially everyone with electronic money that they could spend immediately, if it wanted to stimulate its economy that way, it could do that. There are lots of possibilities for that make it easier. But of course, China could also give the money to through Alipay and WeChat Pay or through into your normal bank accounts. But this, at least in countries like the U.S., this would make it a lot easier.
So Daryl, can I follow up on this? Whether so it's better do the central bank's own currency or just sort of rely on private firm, right? So in one of your polls, you asked sort of whether other countries, especially emerging countries, will use China's digital currency, or another possibility is let Alipay do it, right? Alipay already has 9 wallets outside China, right? Or all the Southeast Asian country and also India, Bangladesh, and so on, right? So in that sense, it's already there. So if sort of this country trusts a private company, probably it will provide a better service than another central bank. You know what I mean? So in that sense, wouldn't that be better and easier to manage in some sense, right? If one country tells BBC, I want you to do it this way, there's something it's much harder to do, right? But on the other hand, it's much easier to tell a private firm, say, we want to make some changes or take over the control to some way. So you know what I mean? Would it not be a easier way to arrange?
Well, the DCEP is already a 2-tiered system. So Alipay and WeChat Pay are already going to be providing DCEP to domestic users. They could provide DCEP to foreign users, or as you say, foreign countries, if they wanted to use a new payment technology within their own borders, they could import Alipay software, or they could have Alipay run a subsidiary inside their own country. And we're seeing, Google Pay, for example, is doing quite well in India. It's not doing that great in the United States, so there's no reason. And private enterprise does very, very well in terms of innovation and technology provision. So I completely agree with the thrust of your question. I don't think it rules out DCEP, though.
June.
Hi, Daryl. I think I agree with the discussion that the Bob and Alice living in China probably wouldn't affect them at all. They would just download another app, and that's pretty much it. And for the vendors, instead of having, in China nowadays, the vendor has this scan code, one side WeChat, another side Alipay. Now they're going to have a box, and the third dimension will be the DCEP. So I'm thinking the success of DCEP probably relies on how much it could be pushed outside of China. As Zhiguo said, it's a national pride. But more practically, I wonder, in your opinion, how successful would it be to promote the usage of IMB outside of China? Do you agree that this is the objective of PBC in pushing out DCEP, and is it going to be successful?
I think it will, if China opens its cross-border capital controls significantly, then the international use of the renminbi will follow, because China is going to be the largest GDP in the world. It's going to have the largest GDP in the world within about 15 years. And history shows that's how the US dollar became dominant. It became the largest economy in the world. China will become the largest economy in the world soon. And if it doesn't have capital controls, the renminbi is going to be very, very dominant, maybe rivaling the dollar within 50 years. With DCEP, that's going to accelerate that if DCEP is either used in other countries or used for cross-border transactions. But I think, that's one of the reasons I put another answer in the poll question on that. I think if China doesn't remove cross-border capital controls, that China will not become, the renminbi will not become a really heavily used international currency. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
So do you think it's a stage one, or is DCEP the phase one in pushing out IMB, or this is just independent of? Or another way to put it, do you see in the foreseeable future, do you see control will be relaxed in China?
Well, this is what I tried to get YEUNG to bite on, but he wouldn't bite. I actually don't. I have a hard time foreseeing when China will relax its capital controls. By the way, Jen, as long as you're here, I could tap you for advice too. One of the advantages of Alipay is that, and WeChat Pay, is that they're linked to super apps, which provide many other financial services that you wrote about, and I think you're going to talk about in this forum soon. If you unbundle those applications from one super app, does it matter? Or that is, if you make payments go through DCEP and then you leave everything else to Ant Group and reduce their dominance in the payments area, does that matter in terms of bundling? Because you wrote about the bundling effect in your paper.
Right. I think the bundling effect is very important. Having the ecosystem is very important to give rise to the success of Alipay as well as WeChat Pay, especially offline usage. So I don't think, I mean, for people living in China, I don't think DCEP would matter too much. I think the future of DCEP is really cross-border usage, but that is bundled together with capital control. But even thinking about capital control, even nowadays when we use credit card consumption across border, there is no, I mean, it's freely exchanged RMB across other currencies. So within that context, I think maybe DCEP will be useful, but not in terms of the regular banking service, like transferring accounts, transferring cash amount across the banks, like the SWIFT code function. I think that probably will not be feasible without the capital relaxing of the capital control.
Oh, all right. So time almost running up, but I'm using my as a moderator. Let me ask two questions. One a little bit broader, so that I really want to hear your thoughts. Many economists, at least at the international side, worry about the macro implication of the DCEP. If I understand correctly, that at this point that the DCEP is just replacing M0, but without any multiplier. So if could have some shrinkage effect. But you also mentioned that the DCEP may help in some monetary policy implementation. It's a little bit vague, and if you have some thoughts to share, that would be nice. So that's the first question. Second question, thanks to Bernie, he was saying that how can we do research on this topic? Now we do have the DCEP thing, in a way that where do we collect data? Or maybe it's already the data, but it's locked down, going to be forever. So if you have some thoughts to share on that, that would be very good.
Or would there be some clever way to have a design that we can have something parallel to shed light on this phenomenon that is yet to be fully developed?
Yeah, it's quite frustrating to be speculating about these global implications when even domestically there's not much happening yet. One of the things one could do is to try to simulate the effect of DCEP through Alipay or WeChat Pay data. I want to go first, though, to Zhiguo's question, how does it help with respect to monetary policy? I think it will slightly increase this velocity of circulation of money simply because paper money is slow. So to the extent that it displaces paper money, it's going to have some effect there. It might increase the transmission of monetary policy because you can move money a little bit faster. But I think the more important effect, at least the one that China's central bank is pointing to, is data. Data is crucial when conducting monetary policy. If you can get real-time pricing and payment data, you have your finger on the pulse of liquidity and pricing and the speed of money in the economy. And if you see it speeding up and you're worried about inflation, you'll know it within hours. You don't have to wait until you collect bulk data with a delay. And I've talked to central bankers in other in other areas who say, well, yeah, what we do is we try to get FedEx to give us all of their real-time, parcel movements, because that helps us understand how the production of goods and services is increasing. Or we try to get information on credit card use as fast as we can, and so on. So I think having it in one unified database where you can do big data analysis, that's advertised by PBC as one of the important applications.
Okay. So,
Zhiguo, may I ask one more question?
yeah, last one.
Yeah.
Last one.
I'm being controlled. Thank you. But Daryl, this is something that really, for me, is very significant. I have been talking to practitioners as well as academics about the internationalization of renminbi. The starting point is really the work on the US dollar dominance in international payment. So one of the complaints is that the renminbi is not liquid enough. There is not enough offshore renminbi and so on and so forth. So my question is, with this, suppose this DCEP materialize, how will it affect the amount of offshore renminbi, okay, electronic or not, and how will it affect the liquidity of the transactions in renminbi outside of China?
Yeah, I mean, it could.
If that is the case, how would it impact on the US dollar dominance? Because I'm thinking about the reserve currency status.
Yeah, by the way, do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that the dollar is dominant? You don't have to answer that question.
You know that we had a conference on this one in the Asian Monetary Policy Forum, and Olivier Pierre, we talk about that quite a bit. So I stay neutral, like you. I'm also a Canadian, by the way.
Okay, that's safe ground. So I answered a similar question to Joanne. I think it's a factor, but it's not going to be an important enough factor until capital controls are relaxed. There are other issues as well. The United States has said, the Fed has said that the U.S. advantages behind the dominance of the dollar are not only the commercial activity levels, it's also free-flowing cross-border movement of the dollar and the rule of law. So I think those are necessary conditions for any currency to become dominant internationally. And I think DCEP is going to, if those conditions are satisfied, then China's renminbi is destined to become an important international payment currency and possibly international reserve currency, among many other aspects, trade finance, many other aspects that give dollars an advantage today. But that's still, it's hard to forecast when that's all going to happen. In the meantime, I think the dollar is, and this is what Pierre-Olivier Blanchard said at your meeting, the dollar is likely to be dominant for some decades. And part of that is backed by the factors that I just described, and also by the depth of the US bond market and the pledgeability of US corporate and government bonds around the world. China could also improve the use of the renminbi if it were to have arrangements globally for pledgeability of China's corporate bonds and government bonds in international central securities depositories. That sounds very wonky and technical, but the dominance of the dollar rests on all of those things. It's going to take a while before China, despite its enormous economic growth, is going to displace all of that, in my view.
All right. Thanks, Daryl, for this wonderful talk today. So next month, Jin will present her paper. And Bernie, you have some concluding remarks you want to say, or that's it? We want to keep it as every month, and everybody will enjoy.
I want to thank Daryl. I want to thank all the panelists, Zhiguo, and all the participants. A good seminar is one that you'll find out that you keep on thinking, and you don't want the seminars to stop. And this is exactly where we are. I don't want it to stop. I really believe that this is very stimulating. We are learning what are the important questions to ask. So Daryl, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for a very stimulating time, and you allow us to think more and in a more systematic way about this issue. Thank you very much. And Junpeng, I look forward to your seminar in March. And
March 11th.
Everyone.
March 11th.
Yes. Meanwhile, everyone, let's get ready for those who celebrate the Lunar New Year. Let's get ready to celebrate the year. And may everyone keep safe. May the COVID be away from us, and may we all enjoy our research and the stimulation. And thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
you.